I'm very grateful that you've invited me today. Basically, 4 years ago, or nearly 5 actually, I was in a room very much like this, when there was a man called Julian Assange, who'd just been arrested on the European Arrest Warrant. And at that time, I was not involved in UKIP as a politician. I was still a lawyer for a hedge fund. And I'd been a lawyer as a barrister, working through criminal courts, family courts. And the idea of wearing that white wig, putting that cloth over me and going to the courts had always imbibed something that was essential, that I felt was important about this nation. The nation that believed in the rule of law, the rights of freedom, that you must know who is seeking to try you, that you will have 12 good men or women, true, that will look after you. And those are the principles that I was taught at law school, at university, and then as a barrister. And suddenly I was there with a man that was being attempted to remove from this country to take him to Sweden on this thing called the European Arrest Warrant. And in the audience was Bianca Jagger, I think there was the daughter of the Goldsmiths, there were various lawyers, the great and the good, saying what a wonderful thing he was, that he's a great man. Now, Julian's sentence has been to be in an Ecuadorian embassy for many years. After that, my sentence was go to the Brussels Parliament. I can turn around and say, at least I know my release date. But why is it so important? Why is freedom and justice and our rule of law and common law so important? And I want to take you back to 1670, to Grace Church Street, not far away from here in the city. Cold day, clouds, it was raining, and outside a Quaker house with 300 people standing to listen to one man who'd faced the government of the day closing the door of that Quaker house, banning him from being able to proffer his ideas of liberty, parliamentary democracy. Those were what he was chanting to his supporters. And all of a sudden out of the crowd came along the officers who dragged him off to prison. And the very next day, he was brought before the Old Bailey with a writ of habeas corpus. And his liberty was restored by the jury, because as they say in the old common law language, he'd restored because the writ common that day caused certified and done in accordance with the law that this man had not been charged or addressed properly with what his offences were. Now that man was William Penn. He went on to found Pennsylvania. He was one of the ideologues that brought about the idea of freedom and democracy in the United States and their Constitution. But he was freed by something that we regard as important here. The writ of habeas corpus. Know who your accuser is, why you are accused, brought before the courts, and released if there wasn't a proper charge. Now compare that system to the European Arrest Warrant. Now, weren't we told that the European Arrest Warrant was an essential piece of crime fighting? That we must be able to track down terrorists, jihadist gangsters, rapists, and capture them all and be able to exchange them freely between countries? Well, yes, there were the odd one or two successes, I would say. Perhaps Osman Hussein as the London bomber. But it was also used, was it not, for what I regard inappropriate and disproportionate use. For example, the European Arrest Warrant was used for transporting someone from one country to another, from the UK, for 0.45 grams of cannabis. Another was exported from our country without trial or due process or assessment here before our own courts for the theft of 2 car tyres. I like the one from Romania, taken for 10 chickens. A mobile phone was stolen in Poland. He was taken from this court by an EAW. £20 worth of petrol, and my favourite, actually, the stealing of a piglet. Well, you know, if you think stealing of a piglet corresponds to that of a jihadist, a terrorist, or a rapist, then I think you've got something vastly wrong with your moral compass about what requires you to use something as draconian as an extradition treaty to remove you on something like that. But there have been more serious cases than that, have they not? I've mentioned the political, Julian Assange. And here we have Alexander Lemesky. Clearly a matter of politics involved in the charge on a simple piece of paper that will have 24 boxes on it, that you will tick one of those boxes, and as long as that box is ticked correctly and has the right signature, you're removed from one country to another. And I don't regard that as justice. There's the unreliable and unjust, as Andrew Simeo found here, a Londoner, charged with murder, when all the people involved in that case were forced to sign a document in Greek, when they were English, that said he was the person who committed it. Later, having spent 2 years in prison, that boy who'd seen people murdered in front of him was released by the courts for mistaken identity. There is the politically correct, with the address of the family who wanted to protect their child in Asia King. And this was carried out in our system, the bedrock of which had already been laid of freedom and democracy that I talked about. And of course, it applied into the extradition treaty. Now, many of you have already researched this before tonight and realised that extradition started in Egypt between Ramses II and Hittite king. Well, I have to admit, it does sound like it's an Egyptian football team there, between myself, but it was a very firm principle that they laid out. And in 1174, we enacted it here through the Treaty of Falaise with Henry II and William of Scotland. And they decided a treaty to deliver fugitives of the law. Now, Elizabeth used it in order to capture a kind of recalcitrant Irishman who was conjuring up agitation against her government, who escaped to Scotland, called Brian O'Rourke. They caught him, they brought him back, that recalcitrant Irishman who disagreed with the democratic ideas of Elizabeth II at the time, and he was hung at Tyburn. Maybe we might see one or two Irish pop stars fleeing to Scotland in the future, and maybe we might need to rely upon that. But bear in mind the key phrases of that treaty, and if I may read. The treaty's purpose should be a crime in both places, where there is no politics but fairness and the rule of law should combine. But ask ourselves, does the European Arrest Warrant combine that very purpose? Are the crimes the same in both places? Absolutely not. We know through facts that the crimes in one country, in Romania, have a different definition to that in Germany, which has a different definition to that here in the United Kingdom. And how has it been used? Well, before I came out here, I had a look at the European Union statistics. One of the great benefits of being an MEP is I still get access. They haven't denied me that as of yet. There were 75,280 EAW warrants since 2004 today. It began quite easily with 1,800 in 2004, but last year there was 14,299, 12,134 the year before. Were they all terrorists? Were they all rapists? Were they all murderers? Absolutely not. What we're seeing is the use of a piece of unfair, unjust, and calculated piece of legislation to intimidate individuals who have gone from country to country for simple things as whether they have stolen a piglet and used abusively against people like Andrew. What links, ladies and gentlemen, in my argument, all of these cases and the European Arrest Warrant are a number of factors. It is a simple principle that the EAW was about unifying EU laws not judicial principle of fairness or justice. It was about administrative simplicity, not respect for the right of liberty, the presumption of innocence, open justice, fair chance to present a defence. It was about political convenience for the EU project's greater good, not for the principle of good courts or a good legal system. The EAW goes to the heart of the EU project. We must remember the Bushell's case of the 1600s and Penn. We must remember Penn and the principles of justice. And we must remember the freedoms that this House helped create. Because if we do not leave the EAW, do not leave the European Courts of Justice, then it's simple. We haven't left the European Union at all. Thank you.